Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of Code Cleanup. Today we're gonna answer the question of when to use variables. Here are four ways which we can answer this question. A first answer to this question would be when you give data a new meaning than what is supposed to mean before you actually instantiate that variable. So here inside this then is an example of how to use this, right? So we have a get that returns an object that has a tire property, right? And we get it, we actually save it inside our variable tire for winter. Now, where's the new meaning in this? Well, you can actually see that just using res.tire might not actually mean anything to the one reading it. But seeing that, oh, it's a tire for winter because we are in a function that tries to switch something to winter tires, it's kind of obvious now that you're actually using it to set, and it's kind of obvious the way you're using it. And that's why you're setting the tire of each car and truck to this tire for winter, right? It's pretty obvious. That's why we're using it, and that's why we're assigning it here. So that would be a valid way of using a new meaning. All right, and here is also a bad example. Here we have a URL that is instantiated this string and then used down here. And let's consider that we're never actually expanding this function, right? The URL here doesn't actually give a new meaning to this string here, right? A programmer that already has worked with this framework, he has some experience and he knows that, oh, this is a URL for the get method. So you don't really need to name this something else. This is what is called as simple aliasing. And I'm going to make another video about aliasing and why it's actually quite a bad idea most of the time. All right, so in this case, there's no need to do this due to the fact that if, let's say, we have some code in between here, then you would have to hunt for this variable and search for it at the top of the function. Let's say that there were like, I don't know, 50 other lines of code in between, right? Therefore, it's just better to copy and paste this and just remove this URL variable. Of course, in case if it is used elsewhere, then you might actually want to keep it. But in this case, let's consider it's not. Okay. The second answer to this question would be when you abstract a piece of data. What does that mean? Here's a good example of abstraction. Let's consider we're in Java now, and we are inside the class computer, and we have a function or method here, replace hardwares, right? And it takes in a list of hardwares, and we iterate over them. And here we have a variable hardware inside computer. And all we are doing with it is simply checking its compatibility level. And then we are replacing that piece of hardware. Pretty simple, right? Here I'm using the stream function to get the first hardware that is of some type, let's say, right? And it's a pretty complicated operation here. That's why we're actually abstracting the way we got this information due to it being kind of difficult to understand in one single line. That's why we're actually abstracting. We are hiding some of the information. We're not giving it a new meaning because hardware inside computer, you can actually deduct that through how this is instantiated. If you were to use this in line, it would be, well, this is the computer, right, that we're using here, and then the hardware list is all the hardware inside the computer, and we're finding the first of some type, right? And we can already deduct that, oh, it's inside the computer because we're actually getting it from the hardware list, and it's a hardware because, well, the type tells us so, right? It's very simple. Okay, so that's why it's not a new meaning, but it's an abstraction, due to it being much more easier to understand from here on out, right? You don't have to understand this whole line of code, what it does, and compile it inside your head so that you actually make sense of whatever this means every single time you're using it, right? Or it might be just one time, but still. So hardware inside a computer is, well, since it's an optional, you also have to check for is present, but if this were to be used inlined, you would just have to check it once here, right? Okay, so that's an example of abstraction, and that's why you might want to instantiate a variable. Okay. The third answer to this question is actually a combination of both of the previous ones. So this is when you're trying to optimize code. This is actually a combination of aliasing and abstraction actually. Why? Because let's take a look at this example. So here we have a coordinate list, and we are getting it from a T, which is a tuple, address and luggage, and it gets the first item and it converts it to coordinates. Now this function toCoordinates is similar to toString, right? And usually don't wanna call toString multiple times for the same variable. You might wanna just call it once and store it inside a variable. Same thing with toCoordinates. This just gives us a coordinate that we then compare it with coord and pa2 coord twice, right? We wouldn't want to do copy paste because then it would be much less efficient. Okay, so that's why I'm saying optimizing, but it's abstracting because we are abstracting the way we are actually getting this variable, and we are aliasing, not really giving it a new meaning. That's something of a subset, but we're at least aliasing that piece of data. Maybe giving it a new meaning, but that really is besides the point. Okay. So the fourth way we can answer this question would be when you're trying to assign, when you assign a key fail point. What does that even mean? Well, let's really quick take a look at this example. This is really simple. It's actually really simple. Well, we have a variable post data here, and it has a lot of fields and whatnot. Sure, we may be abstracting some of this data, but that's not what we're actually instantiating it for. We are actually using it for this post, and this post only. We're not going to be using it anywhere else, so nothing in here, right? And we do something with the result of it. Doesn't really matter. Now, why you might want to do this is for debugging purposes. If you were to add a breakpoint right here, the cool thing about this is you can just take a look at the actual data that is sent, the whole data that is sent to the server, and see if everything there is valid. If we were to inline this, like so, then we've got a problem. If we breakpoint here, how do we even look at all these fields? Well, sure, you can take a look at them individually, but that's a bit more tricky, right? You would have to actually select this in DevTools and say evaluating console or something like that. Sure, there are some debugging tools that actually help you with this, but let's consider we're not in the best case scenario. We usually don't work with the latest and greatest stack in the industry. Okay, so this would be a really good way to actually make your code more debuggable, much easier to maintain. So this is it for today. This was answering the question when to use variables, and I hope you understood why you might want to give your data a new meaning. That just helps understandability. Why you might want to abstract a piece of data, that helps flexibility, right? When you might want to optimize, that helps, well, performance, that's obvious. and when you want to assign it to a key fail point. This is when it helps with maintainability of the code and understandability, right? When you're debugging through the code, you actually have to understand the code, and this helps a little bit figure out what you're sending to the server. Or there are some other cases you might want to use this. So thank you for watching. I hope you understood these 4 answers to the question when to use variables. Of course, there are many more answers that I haven't covered here, but these are the main, this is like a basis to whatever we want to build as a standard, and then we can deviate from there. And if you have any suggestions, comment them down below. As you can see, a viewer suggested that we should switch to something that highlights keywords inside any language, so I switched to Visual Studio Code. I hope that's all right, and hope we will continue to improve this series as we go on. Thank you.